I never thought a voice from the past could still cut me open. It happened on a quiet evening, the kind where the world softens into gold and even shadows seem gentle. My wife was in the kitchen, humming softly, her presence like a warm lantern in a room I once believed would remain dark forever. I was setting the table when the doorbell rang, once, then again, trembling, like someone afraid the door wouldn't open. I should have known. But nothing prepared me for the sight of her standing there. The woman who shattered me. The woman who once swore she'd marry me after finding herself. The woman who left without goodbye, chasing a romance that didn't include me. She looked smaller than I remembered. Eyes swollen. Hands shaking. Like regret had hollowed her out. "I'm here for you," she whispered, as if the years she abandoned me were nothing more than dust brushed off a sleeve. "I'm ready now. Let's get married, like we planned." For a moment, I felt the old wound pulse, then fade, quietly, like a scar becoming nothing more than memory. Because before I could speak, my wife stepped beside me, her hand slipping into mine with a certainty I had never known before. And with a calm, razor-soft smile, she answered for me. "Sorry. He doesn't take trash." That was the moment my past died. And my story, my real story, finally began. The sky that afternoon looked bruised, purple clouds pressed low like they were holding back tears they weren't ready to shed. I remember thinking the air tasted metallic, the kind of taste that appears before something important happens. But nothing about my life felt important back then. I was just wiping down tables in a half-empty cafe, pretending I didn't believe in fate. Then the door burst open, dragged by the weight of the storm behind it, and she stepped in. Dripping hair. Crooked smile. Eyes that searched the room the way lightning searches the sky, quick, curious, unafraid. "Sorry," she said, pushing wet strands behind her ear. "Can I wait here until the rain calms down? I didn't think the sky would try to murder me today." Her laugh was breathless, careless, alive. And I, pathetic, hopeful, too ready, I told her yes before my heartbeat caught up. Before I realized that some storms arrive wearing human skin. She shook water onto the floor as she approached the counter, smelling of wet jasmine and a freedom I had never known. The kind of freedom that walks in without asking, touches whatever it wants, leaves whenever it feels like it. She glanced around like she had already grown bored of the walls holding her. I should have looked away. Instead, I memorized her. "What's good here?" she asked, leaning in slightly. She smelled like rain-slicked pavement. Like something fleeting. I told her the caramel latte was popular. She ordered it even though she clearly didn't want it. She took a sip, wrinkled her nose, then laughed as if life existed for her amusement. That laugh. I didn't know then that it would carve a place inside me I wouldn't know how to fill later. The rain didn't let up. It hit the windows like frantic fingers begging to be let in. She watched it, tapping her fingers on the table, restless even in stillness. I asked if she needed an umbrella. She lifted the broken skeleton of one from her bag. "Does this count?" she asked. It didn't. So I offered mine. That was mistake number one. We walked outside together, sharing the narrow fabric meant for one. She moved close, too close, her shoulder brushing mine, her breath warm every time the wind pushed us nearer. To her, it was probably nothing. To me, it was everything. Every heartbeat felt like a confession I was too scared to speak. "You're sweet," she said softly as we walked. Sweet. A word that blesses and curses at the same time. We reached the intersection where our paths were supposed to split. I should have handed her the umbrella, wished her well, and returned to the safety of my ordinary life. But she looked at the sky, storm clouds glowing faintly gold under the streetlights, and said, "Walk a little more with me. The city looks prettier when it's drenched." So I did. Of course I did. We wandered through puddles reflecting the trembling lights above. She talked about things far bigger than me, dreams, travels, chaos she wanted to chase. I listened like each word was a string pulling me forward. Thunder cracked somewhere in the distance. She didn't flinch. She lifted her arms, spinning briefly, letting raindrops kiss her skin. And under the soft glow of the lamps, she looked unreal, like an unfinished painting waiting for the right artist to claim her. I thought, stupidly, that maybe she was meant for me. But when she finally stopped spinning, her eyes met mine with a kind of gentle distance. A distance that said, "You are warm to stand beside. Not warm enough to stay with." I didn't understand it then. I mistook nearness for meaning. Attention for affection. Rain for romance. She smiled once more, a small, quiet thing, and whispered, "Tonight feels like destiny." She didn't say whose destiny. That was the night a small, fragile piece of me dedicated itself to her without permission. A piece she would never hold gently. And as the rain softened and the streetlights flickered, I told myself fate had brought her to me. But fate, I would learn, is just another word for storm. There's a strange kind of comfort that comes from falling into someone's orbit, even when you know you're the only one drifting closer. With her, that comfort became ritual. A quiet ache I fed with every message she sent past midnight. Every small smile she tossed my way like breadcrumbs scattered for a starving bird. She liked talking. I liked listening. And somehow, that imbalance became our language. She would text me things no one else knew, how she hated the sound of alarm clocks, how she kept losing earphones but never the letters her grandmother wrote, how she was terrified of being ordinary. I soaked up every confession like ink on paper, treasuring even the ones that were sharp. "You remember everything," she said once, eyes narrowing with curiosity rather than appreciation. "Most people forget the things I say." But I remembered because remembering her felt like purpose. She never asked for the weight of my devotion. I carried it anyway. Our nights were spent on rooftops, a place she claimed was high enough to feel alive but low enough to run away. We'd sit side by side, legs dangling over the edge, the wind tugging at her hair like it wanted to steal her from me. "Do you think I'm meant for more than this?" she'd ask, pointing at the city lights trembling below. "Yes," I always answered. A dangerous truth, because with each dream she chased, she drifted farther, and I told myself I could follow. Sometimes, in those fragile hours between midnight and dawn, she'd reach over and brush her fingers against mine. Not entwine. Not hold. Just brush. Like testing the warmth of a flame she had no intention of staying near. Each touch was a spark I mistook for fire. One evening, the city lights flickered from a power surge, an accidental symphony of darkness and sudden glow. She laughed at the sight, turning to me with eyes reflecting the starlight overhead. I felt something shift, something foolish, something hopeful. Then she leaned in. Her lips met mine softly, barely pressure, barely breath, just a fleeting warmth that felt like a promise to my naive heart. I froze, afraid that moving would break the moment, afraid it would disappear like the evening fog lifting with the sun. But it ended before either of us inhaled again. She pulled back, staring past me, brushing hair behind her ear as if she'd merely commented on the weather. No smile. No explanation. No recognition of the wound she had carved open. "Don't look at me like that," she said lightly. It was nothing. Just a moment. A moment for her. A universe for me. I replayed that tiny slice of eternity for weeks. I painted it onto the walls of my mind. I held it like a fragile relic that proved I wasn't imagining everything. But the next morning, she spoke to me like it never happened. Her voice was airy, unchanged. I told myself she was protecting herself from feeling too much. The truth was simpler. Crueler. She loved the way I loved her. The devotion. The attention. The constant orbit around her brightness. But she didn't love me. And I was too blinded by the glow she cast to realize that proximity to the sun is not the same as being held by it. Every time she leaned against me on the rooftop, every time her laughter echoed into the wind, every time her hand brushed mine like a secret half-formed, I fell deeper into a story written with uneven ink. She took without taking responsibility. I gave without demanding anything in return. And somewhere in that imbalance, somewhere quiet and dangerous, the first cracks of betrayal began forming. Barely noticeable. Barely audible. But inevitable. University festivals always smelled like youth, sweet, sticky, reckless youth. Candy floss melting in warm hands, cheap perfume hanging in the air, adrenaline buzzing under the lights like static waiting to spark. I remember weaving through the crowd that night with a bouquet of white lilies, the kind she once told me felt pure, like untouched snow. She didn't know I bought them for her yet. I wanted it to be a surprise. She'd been nervous for weeks about her performance. I stayed up late helping her rehearse, listening to her spiral into doubt, coaxing her back to confidence with words I meant too deeply. She'd fallen asleep on my shoulder once, murmuring my name like a fragile secret. So when the MC began announcing performers, my chest fluttered with something foolish, anticipation. Hope. The belief that maybe tonight she would acknowledge the quiet almost love we'd been circling for months. But when the spotlight hit her, she didn't look like the girl who had cried into my hoodie at 2 a.m. She looked like a star. Bright. Unreachable. A version of her that had no room for me. The music swelled. And then, him. A man stepped onto the stage beside her. Tall. Confident. The kind of confidence that announces itself even before he speaks. His arm slid around her waist like it lived there. My breath stuttered. She didn't push him away. She leaned into him, effortlessly, intimately. Then she took the mic. Her voice rang out across the festival field, echoing off booths and tents and the stunned silence blooming inside me. This is the man I love. Love. The word detonated inside my chest. The crowd roared with applause, too loud, too bright, too happy for a moment that felt like being erased. He kissed her cheek. She blushed. They looked perfect, a painting framed in adoration. And I stood among strangers, holding flowers that suddenly felt heavy and ridiculous. My world didn't shatter. It simply emptied, quietly, cruelly, like someone had opened a drain beneath my feet. I kept waiting for her eyes to find me in the crowd. Just once. Just enough to say I didn't forget you. But she never looked my way. Later, when the lights dimmed and the noise faded, I was still there, clutching the bouquet like a lifeline unraveling. She approached me, annoyance pinched between her brows, not guilt. Never guilt. Why do you look like that? She asked. Her voice lacked softness. It lacked everything I had once given her. I thought, my words collapsed under their own stupidity. She sighed, tossing her hair like she was brushing off dust. Don't make this dramatic. You were just, comfort. Someone to talk to. Someone who showed up when I needed company. Just comfort. A placeholder. A chair she sat on while waiting for a better seat to open. He's the real thing, she continued. You knew that, didn't you? No. I didn't. But she walked away before I could answer. The lilies slipped from my fingers, hitting the pavement with a sound too soft for the weight they carried. Petals scattered across the ground, white pieces curling at the edges like they'd been bruised by the fall. I stared at them, thinking how love dies quietly. Not with a scream. But with a shrug. As she disappeared into the crowd, laughing at something he whispered, I felt something inside me fold inward, small and trembling. That was the night I learned the truth no one wants to admit. Love can be a stage. And sometimes, you're not the star. You're not even a supporting role. You're scenery. Forgettable enough to be stepped over on someone else's way to the spotlight. A week after the festival, when the shock had dulled into a throb I carried in my chest like a bruise I couldn't press without hurting, she sent the message. Not a call. Not a conversation. A message. 4 lines. Dry. Hollow. Sharp enough to finish what little of me was left. I'm leaving. Don't wait for me. I need to see where this goes. No apology. No goodbye. Not even my name. Just departure, written like an errand reminder. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, hoping some hidden softness would appear in the spaces between the sentences. Some hint that she cared enough to cushion the blow. But there was nothing. Just white digital silence. Dignity is supposed to be noble, but when you're heartbroken, it feels like metal armor, too heavy to wear, too painful to remove. I tried to be calm. Tried to breathe. Tried to convince myself that people leave all the time. That I would be fine. I wasn't. For days, I checked my phone obsessively, morning, noon, midnight. I told myself she might reach out. That she might regret the coldness of her words. That she might say she missed me. She didn't. Not once. Her absence settled over my life like dust, slow, inevitable, suffocating. I walked through my days in a muted haze, performing routines without presence. Eating without taste. Sleeping without rest. Smiling without sincerity. Loneliness became a room I lived in. Grief became the air I breathed. I kept the flowers from the festival until they dried completely, petals curling inward like they were grieving too. Some nights, I would find myself rereading her old texts, searching for signs of indifference I had ignored. They were there, obvious, merciless. She vanished from my world the way rain disappears from steaming asphalt, quickly, silently, leaving only stains that don't evaporate as easily. The months that followed felt like walking through thick fog, every step heavy, every breath uncertain. Friends asked if I was okay. I lied. Everyone lies when their heart has collapsed. It's easier than explaining how an entire future can crumble in someone else's hands. But pain, when it lingers long enough, becomes a teacher. Somewhere between exhaustion and surrender, I realized a truth I had avoided for years. I had built my identity around loving someone who never planned to love me back. I had begged for crumbs when I deserved an entire table. I had mistaken survival for devotion. I had confused attention with affection. Once that truth settled inside me, something quietly shifted. Healing didn't come in a single moment, it arrived in fragments. The first sunrise I noticed again. The first time coffee tasted like something other than regret. The first unexpected laugh that didn't hurt. Piece by trembling piece, I rebuilt myself. Not into someone new, but someone whole. Someone who didn't need to be chosen to feel valuable. And then, she appeared. Not her. Not the woman who left me bleeding. Someone else. Someone gentle. A woman who looked at me like she saw the cracks and didn't flinch. Someone who didn't require me to shrink, to wait, to ache in silence. Someone who didn't treat my affection as spare change. She didn't sweep into my life like a storm. She arrived like morning light, subtle, patient, inevitable. And over time, she taught me the thing I had never understood. Love is not earned through suffering. Love is given. Freely. Fully. Willingly. She taught me what it means to be chosen. And without realizing it, she led me toward the life I never knew I deserved. Meeting my wife didn't feel like fate crashing through the door the way she once had. There was no storm announcing her arrival, no trembling breath, no frantic heartbeat begging to be noticed. Instead, she came into my life the way dawn spills across a tired night, slow, gentle, quietly miraculous. It wasn't lightning. It was warmth. A steadying kind of warmth I hadn't realized my hands were cold for. She met me at a time when I still carried the remnants of who I used to be, fractured, cautious, stitched together by fragile hope and half-healed wounds. She didn't flinch when she saw them. If anything, she leaned closer. "I don't need your mask," she told me once as we stood together in line for coffee. "I want to know the you who thinks too much. The you who hurts quietly. The you who survived." No one had ever asked to see that version before. She laughed at my small jokes, the ones I used to swallow because someone else had once told me they were pointless. She listened to the pauses between my sentences, the breath hesitations where old fear lived. She held my hand without making it a performance, without checking who was watching, without making the gesture conditional. With her, affection wasn't currency. It was nature, effortless, abundant. And slowly, unbearably, I realized something. With her, I wasn't an option waiting to be upgraded. I was a choice. A deliberate, spoken, unwavering choice. My life began to stabilize around the same time. Work that once felt heavy started feeling meaningful. People began treating me differently, more with respect than pity. Friends told me I looked lighter, brighter, more grounded. One even said I seemed like someone who finally remembered how to live. My wife saw it too. Of course she did. One evening, as we sat on the floor of our nearly furnished apartment, paint cans still open, the scent of fresh beginnings lingering around us, she brushed my hair back gently. "You finally see yourself the way I see you," she whispered. Her words slipped into the cracks I didn't know were still open and sealed them with something soft. Something holy. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing love. Love wasn't running away from me. Love met me where I stood, and stayed. Our wedding was small. Sunlight pooled across the wooden floor. Flowers hung in simple bunches. Her smile shook me more than any storm ever had. When she took my hands and vowed to choose me, to stand with me, to build a life with me, I felt something inside me exhale, a breath I didn't know I'd been holding since the day I first learned what heartbreak tasted like. For a brief, golden stretch of time, I believed my story had settled. That the past had bowed out quietly, respectfully. But life has a strange sense of timing. While I was learning to breathe again. While love was teaching me to bloom. While the future was gently reshaping itself around someone who cherished me. My past was already walking back toward me. Dragging luggage. Clutching regrets. Hoping to reclaim what she once tossed away without hesitation. But she didn't know one thing. I was no longer the man waiting in shadows, hoping to be chosen. And she was no longer someone I could be destroyed by. The sky the day she returned looked eerily familiar, dusky blue bleeding into deep purple, as though the universe had kept the same palette from the night she walked out of my life. There was a stillness in the air, a strange anticipation, like symmetry was a game fate enjoyed too much. I wasn't expecting anyone. Least of all her. The doorbell rang once. Then again, softer, almost pleading. When I opened the door, time folded in on itself. She stood there exactly as the memory of her, yet nothing like it at all. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes red-rimmed, her shoulders hunched as if regret were a physical weight dragging her down. A single suitcase leaned against her leg, its handle trembling lightly in the wind, or maybe that was her hand. She whispered my name as if it were still hers to use. As if years hadn't passed. As if I hadn't rebuilt myself from the pieces she left behind. "I made a mistake," she began. Her voice cracked, weak and unfamiliar. "He wasn't who I thought he was. But you always loved me." She swallowed, eyes shimmering with desperation. "I want to try again. I'm ready to marry you now." Marry. The word should have shattered me. Once, it would have. But instead, all I felt was a small, distant ache, like hearing an old song you once loved but now can't recall the lyrics to. Something that belonged to another version of me. A version that no longer existed. I opened my mouth to speak, not out of anger, not out of longing, but from a strange desire to give closure to a story I'd outgrown. But before a single word left me, I felt warmth settle against my arm. My wife. She stepped beside me with the grace of someone who knew exactly where she belonged, someone whose presence never demanded permission. Her hand slid through the crook of my elbow, grounding me, reminding me that love could be soft and certain. She looked at the woman in front of us, not with jealousy, not with spite, but with clarity. She saw everything at once. The suitcase. The pride swallowed. The pattern of coming back only when life had bruised her. The expectation that I would still be waiting. My wife's eyes softened, but her spine stayed straight. And when she spoke, her voice was velvet wrapped around steel. "Sorry," she said, kindly, devastatingly. "He doesn't take trash." The words didn't need to be loud. Truth never does. The woman flinched, her breath catching like she'd been struck. Shame flooded her expression, raw, unfiltered. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then looked at me as if hoping I'd contradict the truth that had just been handed to her. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel spiteful. I felt free. For the first time, my past didn't loom like a shadow behind me. It stood there trembling on my doorstep, apologizing through its own unraveling. I let out a slow breath, one I'd been holding for far too many years. "I'm sorry," I said softly, not unkindly. "But that part of my life is over." Her gaze dropped. Her shoulders collapsed inward. She turned, lifting her suitcase with hands that had once held all my hopes carelessly. My wife squeezed my arm gently, no gloating, no victory. Just presence. I closed the door. Not with anger. But with finality. Behind it, a life I no longer wanted faded into silence. Ahead of it, the life I chose waited, warm, steady, bright. And for the first time, I felt completely, irrevocably whole. After she left the doorstep, the house exhaled. It was subtle at first, a looseness in the air, a softness settling along the walls, but it felt like someone had peeled away a layer of heaviness I didn't even know was still clinging to me. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, letting the silence expand. Letting it wrap around me like a blanket finally freed from the weight of a storm cloud. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. No part of me throbbed with old wounds begging to be reopened. I felt peaceful. A word I once believed belonged only to other people. My wife appeared beside me, her presence quiet but grounding. She threaded her fingers through mine, guiding me toward the kitchen like she was leading me away from the last shadow of my past. "Sit," she murmured gently. The chair felt warm beneath me, familiar. Safe. She boiled water, and I watched the steam rise from the kettle, curling in the air like a small, whispered blessing. The scent of chamomile drifted toward me, comforting, steady, a reminder of the life I had built with calm hands and patient love. My wife set the cup in front of me and rested a hand on my shoulder. "She thought you were still the man she abandoned," she said softly. "She didn't realize you outgrew the version of you she broke." Her words didn't sting. They settled. Deep. True. I nodded, letting the warmth of the tea seep into my palms, letting the truth sink into the places inside me that had once been raw. Later that night, I stepped outside to breathe the cool air. The moon hung bright and unashamed in the sky, coating the street in silver light. I stood there, hands in my pockets, letting the quiet night wrap itself around my shoulders. For a moment, I remembered the boy I once was, the one who waited under festival lights holding flowers that never reached their intended hands. The one who answered late-night texts like they were prayers. The one who mistook proximity for love, crumbs for devotion. He deserved better. He deserved gentleness. He deserved a love that didn't make him shrink. And now, he finally had it. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains and landed on my phone, illuminating a notification. A message from her. Long, trembling paragraphs. Apologies bleeding between each sentence. Sorrow. Regret. A desperate attempt to rewrite history with words too late to matter. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond either. Some endings don't require confrontation. Some wounds close only when you stop touching them. Some stories dissolve the moment you stop feeding them your attention. I set the phone down. When I walked back into the bedroom, my wife was waking, hair tousled, eyes soft with sleep. She looked at me with a smile that was half dream, half devotion. I leaned down and kissed her forehead, feeling something warm and steady settle inside my chest. This was the justice I didn't know I was waiting for. Not revenge. Not superiority. Not watching someone else crumble. No. Justice was waking into a life I once believed was beyond me. Justice was loving someone who loved me without hesitation. Justice was becoming the person my past never imagined I could become. As I held my wife in my arms, sunlight creeping slowly across the floor, I felt the truth root itself inside me like a growing thing. Justice isn't revenge. It's becoming the person your past never believed you could be. And at long last, I had finally done that.